Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I'm going to work on a Pflueger Fusion, and this reel is a 6-ball bearing reel. This one is in the 5,000 size, I think, made in China. It's part of the Pure Fishing lineup, and interestingly enough, if you look at this, and you look at the Penn Fierce, which is also a Pure Fishing reel, well, other than the color, it gets pretty hard to tell the differences between the two. You side by side, you stand them up, and they look very similar. Case design and rotor design, and I'm very interested to look in the middle of this one and see if there's anything unusual about one or the other. This is a nice 6-ball bearing reel. The Fierce is 5, it's 4 plus 1, so we'll try and figure out where that extra ball bearing may be. And Pflueger is right in the middle now of the Penn lineup. So the Penn lineup has the Shakespeare on the lower end, or the value end. It has Pflueger in the middle, and then it has the Penn line kind of upper. And now they've acquired Van Staal, so I guess we would say that the Van Staal becomes the upper end of the line now. So we're going to take this one apart. We'll show you how to service it, show you how it's made, and hopefully I'm going to get this one fishing again. I plan an upcoming trip with my grandson to go for some bluefish and some sea bass, and this would be a nice reel to introduce him to that type of fishing. Pretty sturdy. He's probably got 60-pound braid on there, which is plenty, and we'll see what we can do with this one. So let's start by taking off the exterior parts. And while I do that, I'd like to also start by thanking our first responders and essential personnel and everybody involved in keeping us safe during the pandemic. I've heard from a lot of you. I really do appreciate everything that it is that you're doing. And boy, the dedication it takes day in, day out to keep us safe from COVID, and for those that have contracted the disease, to nurse them back to health. So regardless of whether you're first aid or EMT or fire, police, rescue, or any kind of healthcare worker, thank you for what it is that you do. So I'm unfamiliar with this reel, but I believe this has a pass-through screw here. It may or may not. We're going to find out. It does not. If you take off that side cap and you do not see a screw on this side, it means that the handle screws in to the main gear. So to remove the handle from the main gear, simply turn it opposite the cranking direction. In this case, it's a clockwise turn. That will remove your handle. And as I take those pieces and parts off, I put them into a parts tray, which is the bottom of a plastic jug, just so that I can keep track of them. When you look to see the next step on removing, you need to see where the side plate is. If you have a line here, or a crack, or whatever, seam, then that means the side plate can come off independent of the rotor. If you look and there's no side crack there and it continues up under the rotor, then the rotor, taking off the rotor would be the next step. In this case, we can remove the side plate next. And they have a screw that you can either use a Phillips head or a flat blade on, whatever is most convenient. I've run into a couple of reels lately, heavily salted, where they weren't flushed after use. You should always hose down a reel that's been used in a saltwater environment. I recommend it for every reel, every time you go fishing, to get the dirts and contaminants off. But I've had a couple of saltwater reels come in recently where the screws were salted in place, began to corrode, and that kind of just ruined the reel because you couldn't get the side plate screws out, no matter how much penetrating oil and other things you've used to get that done. You notice I lay the screws on my table there because I wanted to make sure all of those screws were the same size. That way I note if there is a different size, where it came from in the side plate, and take care accordingly. There may be one more screw under this bump guard, so we're going to take the bump guard off next. It's called a bump guard because it's a shock absorber. If you whack that against a pier rail or a gun wall or drop it, that will take the shock rather than breaking the case. All right, let's see how this one comes off next. It pulls off, and it doesn't appear that there's another. Yep, there is. There's one small little screw there. Generally speaking, there always is, and they do their best to hide it, and that requires a micro screwdriver to get that last one out. I recommend that you take pictures along the way. That way, as you go to reinstall, you'll be able to have a reference guide there if you get stuck. And since this is now a member of the Pure Fishing family, I suspect that you can order the parts for a reel like this from Pure Fishing's parts department. You may not be able to find that. You may only be able to find the Penn parts. That's okay. If you call the Penn parts number, they will either fulfill that order for you, or they will direct you to the right place. I've had a couple of instances now where I've needed the Pflueger parts for this Pflueger offshore reel, and those were fulfilled through Penn. This is a metal case, and here's our internals, and it looks like the reel is a basic design of a reel. We have a main gear, crosswind block, crosswind gear underneath this crosswind block, axle shaft, a pinion gear. We'll take off the rotor, we'll get behind that for the anti-reverse, but this one looks like it's just in need of some lubrication. Looks like we have a sealed bearing here. That's a nice little touch. We'll take the axle shaft off next. Those are two Phillips head screws that are holding the axle in place, so go ahead and use your Phillips head screwdriver for those. This is a number 1 Phillips head. Sometimes people ask me what size the screwdrivers are. And I'm going to take those two and I'm going to put them in a separate corner of my parts tray, because that looks like it's almost the same screw as the one that's holding the case on here. Don't want to confuse those. Once you take those two out, you should be able to remove the axle shaft. That goes in my parts tray. And once you have the axle shaft out, you can remove the main gear. Now the reason why you have to pull that axle shaft out first is that axle shaft rides between these two pieces here. And if you don't pull it out and you try to remove the main gear, you're going to knock against the drive on the back of the main gear. Okay, axle shaft is out, the main gear is out. All the pieces and parts are in there. Next up then, we can take off our crosswind block. Our crosswind block has a groove in the back of it. There's a stud on the crosswind gear that rotates around, and it will pull the crosswind block in that groove. And when it pulls it in the groove, that will cause the axle shaft to go up and down based on the location of that stud. The teeth on that gear are driven by the back end of that main gear. All right, you're going to pull that off. That's just riding on a post. And we have a bearing underneath that, so that is different than the construction of the Peen Fierce. The Peen Fierce simply has a stud. This one has a bearing riding there. That is not a shielded bearing. So let's see if we can't get that bearing off as well while we're at it. I'm going to put that into the crosswind gear for now, put that into the case. And as you can tell, it's basically, this reel is not having any problems. It performed nicely, but it's run out of grease and oils. That happens when you're fishing. Greases and oils evaporate and or leak out of the case or do whatever. In this case, the reel is clean, so it's just a matter that over time the grease is evaporated. How does it do that? Well, around here we get very hot days, and heat will help to evaporate those oils and greases. There's not much left on the back of this one. It is the original grease. It's all spun in here. You can see it's clean, so I'm not worried too much about any kind of contamination that might have gotten into the reel. But I do want to clean it up and give it a fresh coat of grease when we go to reinstall. So if you like these types of videos, if you're into the hobby or even the business of reel repair, and I'd like to see more, then I'm going to encourage you to subscribe. As you can tell, we not only take the reels apart completely, but we kind of do a little narrative here that tells you how the reel was made, what it's made, some of the history of the reel sometimes, and best practices in terms of cleaning the reel and what you might want to avoid and so on. And if you subscribe, please hit the notification button. That way it's going to tell you when I post a video, and when I post a video you can make a determination as to whether you want to go see that one or not. I work on all kinds of reels, so today it might be a spinning reel, tomorrow it might be a trolling reel, and the next day it might be a bait caster. I just never know. It's whatever comes into my shop. Generally gets a little video to show the customer what I did in terms of the work. So I've cleaned all the old grease off there. That's going to go into my tray as well. And the last thing we want to do then is get up top to the rotor here. and we'll take a look at what's going on under here as well. So there's a tie down clamp here. It's held on by a little Phillips head screw. I'm going to take that out next. Looks like one more turn or two. I think we got that now. And then this is always an odd nut, but I think this wrench works on it. There we go. This one comes off in a normal counterclockwise direction. I like these that have the flat top finish. You can't over tighten the rotor. Every now and then I'll get one in the shop that tighten down too much, and folks tell me of the bogged down performance, and truth of the matter is it wasn't the parts at all, it was the tie down on the rotor nut that caused that. While I have this here, I know the bail works. I've been playing around with it. You don't need to take a bail off during a normal service if it's working. I do use a penetrating oil. In this case I'm using WD-40, and I use that just to kind of dissolve any kind of dirt and grease in that might be in there. Just a tip, if you have a sticking bail, don't take the bail off first. Do that. Spray it with the penetrating oil. You may find that that removes the dirt and grease, and all of a sudden it's not sticking any longer. Alright, we're going to remove the rotor then. When I removed the rotor, there was a little bushing that came out from the axle shaft. That holds the axle shaft tight as it's going through the pinion gear. So if yours popped out and you wondered where it goes there. Don't worry about it. I kind of saw that ahead of schedule, so we don't have a problem with that. Now this is what I was saying about the Fierce. This is darn near an identical setup to the Fierce reel. So I suspect that a lot of this reel and a lot of the Fierce reel is identical. This piece is probably interchangeable. It's just one of those pieces you come to know. Same thing with this eccentric spring here, the anti-reverse dog. This anti-reverse dog is a fail-safe. There's ridges on the back of the rotor, but this is not your primary anti-reverse. You have an anti-reverse clutch under here that's stopping the reel. So when you go to reinstall this, since it popped off, it's going to go in this direction. There's kind of little two raised arms over here with a hole in the middle. That's where this angle spring is going to go. It might be difficult, so let me bring it up and show you the angle spring right there. That's going to ride inside the hole here. This whole thing is going to ride like that when reinstalled. You'll see that when I go to reinstall the wheel. Take a picture here and notice how the little collar is set down. Notice that we don't have a rounded collar all around. We have a flat side of the collar. In this case, that flat side of the collar is corresponding to the high point on the bail trip ramp. Pull this little sleeve off. Remember that the angle part of that spring goes up. We'll pull the 3 screws out here. So different than the Fierce. No, not up top. Interestingly enough, and again, they're cousins as reels. I suspect they're made in the same plant. They use a lot of the same parts. I don't know the pricing on this one versus the Fierce. This is the Fierce 3 I'm comparing it to now. I don't know the pricing differential on them, but overall, this one has another ball bearing in it. We know that from the Crosswind 1 gear. These have shielded bearings. The new Fierce 3 have shielded bearings as well. The Fierce 2s do not have shielded. Yeah. Okay, the collar comes off. This whole assembly now shall pull out. And when you pull this out, you would be hard-pressed to say I'm not looking at a Penn reel here, because you are. So we have a collar and a bearing sitting inside of this. We have a ferrule and the anti-reverse. Ferrule and anti-reverse. And we have another bearing. In this case, it's shielded, not sealed. The one up top is sealed. And then we have our pinion gear. So we want to take our pinion gear and just kind of clean that out. I'm just using a soft brush for it, and I haven't put any of the parts back into the parts tray because this is the end of the line in terms of taking all the pieces of parts off. I have a clean interior. I just wanted to get up top and deal with this. So it's kind of last one out is first one back in. After we clean that, we're going to use a fishing reel grease, to make sure that the pinion gear gets its share of grease on it. I'm using a Penn precision reel grease. I don't care what greases you use. What I do care is that you use a fishing reel grease when you go to grease your reel. Okay, the shielded bearing came next. Oil can seep in through the sealed bearing, so go ahead and put some oil on that. That comes up next. Then our collar for our anti-reverse goes on next. Now the anti-reverse, all you want to do is make sure it's clean. Don't go ahead and oil this thing. If you oil it, this is a friction-driven piece. If you oil that, then it's going to get too slippery and malfunction because it can't grab the ferrule. So make sure your ferrule is dry as well. Just clean it of any dirt. And that's a common failure of your anti-reverse clutch. Anti-reverse clutch, you have a plastic side and a metal finish side. The metal finish side goes up. If you install that upside down, your anti-reverse will work in reverse. Your reel won't turn when you turn it to the proper side. We have a sealed bearing here. Push it out just to show you. There is a difference in the collar. I just had a Penn Fierce live liner come in where the collar was installed upside down. You'll see it's thicker on one side with a little ridge and wider on the other. This is a sealed bearing that belongs in there. We can go ahead and put some oil on there, but typically it's not going to do anything, but you can feel good about it. The reason why you have that offset there is there's a lip on the ferrule on this one that it has to come over in order to sit flush. So there's your stack. If you put this on upside down, you would have a space here. That's what happened with the other one. And when the other one had a space there, when you put the rotor on it, it compressed it and put tension onto the whole assembly, and it didn't work properly. All right, so this all goes back in. Make sure it gets seated properly. Remember what we said about that flat piece was facing the ramp. Let's go ahead and put it over there. 3 small screws. Those of you that know me know it's time to go for a cup of coffee because I'll probably drop these screws a couple of times before I get them all in. But that's just kind of me and small screws. Okay, so I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing. Again, I didn't know what I was going to see under the reel. And what I'm seeing under the reel kind of screams Peen Fierce at me with the addition of an oscillating gear bearing. So I'm going to have to go look at the pricing on this one. And kind of try and figure out when the year of manufacture was and the like. I got this as a part of a larger fishing reel lot I bought of used equipment. And as I mentioned, I'm looking forward to taking my grandson out fishing. And one of the things we're going to do, we'll put this on a pole for him and let him give it a ride, and we'll see how it goes. Probably spool this up. It's got some braid on there. I don't know how old the braid is. We probably will remove that and spool that up with some new braid and see what we can do. Next on then is the collar. It has that angled piece to it that faces up. Then we have our anti-reverse. Remember what I said, there's 2 flat bars and a hole in between. Kind of got to do that visually now. But you're going to line this up. And it may be hard to see, but right now that angled piece is sticking up through this hole. The other hole goes, the other stud on the anti-reverse dog slides up and down. So as you're operating this, it's turning fine. As soon as you go to back pedal, oops. When you're operating this way, it holds it in. And when you go to back pedal, it'll pull it back out. It needs pressure on there from the rotor at the moment, but that's how it's going to swing. And those teeth, when they come out, are going to intersect with the ridges on the rotor here. From a rotor standpoint, we already sprayed down the 2 side plates for the bail. You can put a drop of oil onto the lever that's going to intersect with the trip. I don't think there's a bearing in here. Some people ask me why I don't oil the line guide. It usually doesn't have a bearing in there, but you can go ahead and put a spot of oil in there to make that one successful. And then if you had a side plate that included this part here, where you'd have to put the side plate on the lower end next. In this case, we don't have that, so I'm going to go right back up top and put that rotor on. And then we know from the rotor perspective, we have that cap nut. It can only go on the one way because the one side is narrower than the other. Before we do that, we got to put that little plastic bushing in there that I was just explaining before. because you won't be able to fit it through the hole in the nut here. This one goes on a regular basis. Traditional right-hand turn. And then it says 9/16. It's between a 14 and a 15 millimeter. 9/16 is working, so I'll just tell you that that's what that one is. We have the tie down going next. Line it up so that a hole comes through the slot there like this. Grab your screw and get that screw in there. So that's the top end service of this reel. It's a top end service of many of the modern reels. If you use the Penn Fierce, the Penn Battle, or any of those, go ahead and just follow these instructions. They will pretty much be identical. Give it a spin to make sure that there's nothing impeding it, and it's a beautifully turning reel at the moment, so I feel good about that. We'll just continue down the road then. We're going to take that crosswind gear with the bearing. We're going to pull the bearing, put a little bit of grease on the outside track for the bearing to slide. And put that in there, snap that in. I'm going to put oil in this because it's an open bearing. And then we're going to put that towards the rear. Get our grease. We want to make sure that we get grease onto the teeth, which are going to be driven by the main gear's backside. And the face of it, which is where the crosswind block is going to slide. We'll put that in next. We'll come back over to the main gear that we just serviced. Cleaned it all up. Time to put new grease on there. Get a little bit onto the shaft that's going to ride through that bearing. Again, get some onto the teeth. You don't have to put it on every tooth. Don't worry. As it spins around, it will spread the grease. Get enough on there that you feel confident that it's properly lubed. Come back in and we can put the main gear in. Next up then would be the crosswind block. There's a little bit of grease left over in that channel, so I'm going to take that out right now. And then just install fresh grease. And then we can get that placed over the stud. There's a hook on that crosswind block. Make sure it gets under this bar here when you go to install. Next up then would be the axle shaft. We haven't quite cleaned that yet, but it came out very nice. It doesn't seem to have any roughness to it. Just make sure that the axle shaft is clear, that you don't have any dirt or anything up above. And a very light coat of grease on this, because as you go to put this through the pinion gear and the bushing there, it will just squeeze off or squeegee off any of the excess. So you don't have to go crazy putting grease on there just to waste it. When you get that set right, you're going to have the two screw holes open. Grab those two screws next. So I like this reel. I think I probably got a bargain out of the deal. Again, I didn't know what the pieces were. You'll see this come up. I think I'll probably post it in a day or two. It's called Facebook Marketplace Finds, and this was one of those. I haven't gotten a chance to post that. I just finished editing that video, but I think I'm going to do this one before I do that. But at any rate, you'll see this one in that lot. I really went after one particular item in that Facebook purchase. I went after a Newell reel, and a lot of other reels came along with it, and I was delighted by the purchase. I just put a little bit of oil onto that bearing. We can close up the case now. Now we know we have the three primary screws, and we have the smaller screw with the micro driver, which goes on the other side. The only thing I don't like about white reels is when I wear that protective glove to keep the grease off my hands, the grease gets on the reel, and you can see all of that, but we'll clean that up. Penn makes a rod and reel cleaner, and before we get done with this, we'll make sure to wipe it down and get all that surplus grease off of there. Generally, when I put a side plate on, I like to go kind of in opposing directions there, so I'll put one on one side and one on the other. And then that'll help tie down and make sure that the case goes on evenly. Folks ask me if they can use a mechanical screwdriver, and I kind of I discourage that, but if you need it, if you don't have the hand strength, If you need it, go ahead and use it, but leave this screw proud. Don't tighten it down fully. Leave that last turn or two to use your hand-driven screwdriver so that you don't over-tighten. Those mechanical screwdrivers come with an awful lot of torque. And actually, I'm working on a reel right now that I just can't get the darn screws out of, and my guess is somebody probably used, whoops, that's the wrong screw. We knew that. This screw that belonged in the side plate, holding that bump guard on, got mixed up with the little one that belongs in here. So, no harm, no foul. I don't think it would have fit anyway thread-wise. Okay, I'm just going to grab a paper towel, get some of this off of here before I go put that bump guard on. Bump guard has a little slotted piece here. Just be careful with that. That slides behind the screw. I probably just over-tightened it a little bit. Don't force it in. If you snap it out, you're going to have a bump guard that doesn't work. I think I have to take that out all the way now, don't I? Sometimes you can just kind of hook it in from behind. Sometimes you can't. Let's see if we can get it in like that now. Still having a little bit of an issue there. There we go. So you have to be careful with these plastic parts. You break them, there's no easy way to repair them. Most of the time what you wind up doing is getting a replacement part, which gets expensive. But you learn from your mistakes. I can tell you that I've probably broken one or two of those off, and it taught me how to pay attention to where those little pieces are. Alright, now we have the little screw for the bump cap. And what's left now would be just checking up top with those drag washers. And I'm certainly going to do that. I don't want anyone going out there fighting a bluefish and find out they don't have the drag washers to land the fish. We have 3 screws that are holding on a retention cap up top here. They're smaller Phillips heads, so go ahead and use the micro driver. So this replaces that traditional clip ring spring that would normally hold these in. The idea with a lot of these is to keep water out of the reel. So we have a collar here which is pretty substantial. I believe it's sitting in an indent in this spool side. And then the adjuster knob should have a big piece of rubber on it that would act to keep that off. It's not waterproofing it totally. Yeah, you can see we have a collar there, so that would keep the water off to some extent. And then we have that rubber piece that's going to try and keep out the middle. So it's not going to totally waterproof these, but it'll do a good job. It'll do a better job than some of the traditional setups. This is our drag stack then. These are felt washers. So interestingly enough, that is the washer design from the Fierce earlier editions, but this has a lot more. Wow, 3, 4. This has a 5 washer set. That's quite a bit. So felt washers are not bad, but felt washers need to be lubricated, and to lubricate them you need to use fishing reel oil. Just a couple of dots. That's to keep them from drying out, because felt will dry out and become very brittle and tear. So that's point 1. Point 2, these look like traditional Penn washers. If you're tearing these up, if you're fighting big fish and those drag washers just aren't working, you can probably move these over to the HT100s for the Penn Battle set. I would think that they probably are interchangeable based on everything else I've seen in this reel. And if you do that, you'll have a Carbon Tex kind of a washer that'll give you much more durability. It won't give you anything more max drag wise, but it will give you more durability. I have 3 rounds, 2 middle, 2 eared. These are called keyed washers, so the 3 alternate. So you have a keyed washer I just lost the video. I assume I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to put this back on. If that's redundant, I apologize. Load that up, grab our adjuster knob, put that back in. And the only thing I have left to do, other than putting the handle on, is to strip this line out, because I don't know the history of that line. Put new line on, put it on a pole, and teach my grandson how to use this one for bluefish. We're going to be going on one of the charter boats that I do the fishing reels for. It'll be his introduction to deep sea fishing out of a charter boat, and we're all excited to do that. Give it a ride. Tell you what, I like the feel of this. This is a really smooth reel. Very smooth reel. We'll just make sure that the barrel works, even though I know it works. And those ball bearings do make a difference. I think he'll have a good time with this. And the advantages is it can switch over. He is a lefty, so he may prefer to crank with the right hand while he uses his left hand to support the pole. We'll find out when we get there. But in the meantime, that's how you service a Pflueger Fusion. It's the SS. It's a 5500 size reel. It's got a gear ratio of 5.6 to 1. And this one's ready to go fishing. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it. Again, please subscribe if you want to see more. Questions and comments, please leave them in the comment section. Doesn't have to be on this reel, it can be on any reel in particular. And if you have a reel that you would like to see serviced, but you don't want to service it yourself, well, contact me on a business card that follows, and I'll be happy to provide you with reel repair information where you can either drop the reel off or mail it in, and I'll be happy to work on your reel for you. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.